the news. Yeah, that you know. Harris is drinking, and yes, I'm thinking, and I'm plotting and scheming. Yo. Back up in the building for another edition of the Harry's Drinking Again podcast. I am your host, Harry Too Scary, aka Mr. Harris. And in this one, we got a special one. We got a special one tonight. I'm going to sit back and become the student while we discuss with the teacher here, because we have a Titanic historian, researcher, author, and I'm sure he's not just limited to the Titanic, but this man is going to come through and tell us all about, what was it, 1912? I want to make sure that is correct. Okay, about the 1912 event heard around the world back then, and a little bit different perspective. We haven't had somebody like this on the podcast before, but thank you guys for joining us once again. And I'm going to do my best to give the best interview for this man and let him speak. So without further ado, Mr. Bill Willard.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here on this wonderful podcast. Thank you. Thank
you, sir. But yes, no, thank you, my man. I was looking over your bio here, and I did listen to a few interviews that you've done on YouTube. I was checking out the Still Token with podcast, I believe, earlier today. And, since you were in high school, you were, very well-versed in this subject. You became fascinated with this subject at a very young age. Is that correct?
Mid 1970s. I'm getting on. This is my 48th year. This summer will start year 49 of being interested in researching this ship and all the ancillary stories. Excuse me. So, long time. Started with the book A Night to Remember. If any of your the people that listen to your show have loved the movie, I suggest they read the book A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. It's an excellent book for anybody middle school and up. If the kids have to do a book report, that's a great book report. It is a nonfiction book, which means those events in that book are real. And the author went to the different survivors to get their stories and put them in his book. And it's probably the best combination of all the stories, bunches of them being in the same place. A lot of people were interviewed by newspapers and such, but this book was the first big grouping of a lot of their stories at the same place. And Walter Lord did a fantastic job with it. They made a movie from it. That was one of the first Titanic movies. They did have a 1943 version. It was a German propaganda film during the war, trying to make the German people mad at the opulence of the British. And instead, as the ship sank, it did just the opposite effect. It made them feel sorry for what was happening. And the propaganda machine in Germany was not too happy. The director ended up being shot and killed over this. But Night to Remember is the best place to start.
Now, if I can start with this first, just to lay out my somewhat, not even knowledge, but kind of hearsay. I will say this. I'm a conspiracy guy. I always have my tinfoil hat wrapped tight. I've heard rumblings of, the people that were on the Titanic, and there's some link with like J.P. Morgan. I don't know if he was on there or he was supposed to be on there, but it to my knowledge, it has a similar feel as like a 9/11, almost 100 years later, as far as some of the pieces that were moved around on the board days before, days after, and all this. Is there any kind of truth to my way of thinking, in those regards? Could you break down some of the politics behind the Titanic and the people?
The ship was owned by managed by White Star Line, which is based in England, and it was owned by, excuse me again, the International Mercantile Marine, which the head of it was J.P. Morgan. There is a story that J.P. Morgan was possibly going to be on Titanic, but because of an ear infection or some kind of an ear problem, he didn't get on board. The conspiracy came up probably in the 1970s about the Federal Reserve and the banking and things like that. And it's words. There's no evidence to any of it. There's a man in the UK that supports it 100%, swears it happened, says there was a secret meeting in a certain hotel on a certain day. And we've asked him, how do you know? What is your evidence? And it's been about 7 years and he still can't produce it. So it's a conspiracy theory. The Vanderbilts from North Carolina sent a man in there to be on the ship. They weren't on it, and he was a very rich man in America. There were a lot of other rich families that were later involved that were not on board. So I hope that no one would have risked killing 2,000 people just for a little power like that. That's way out there. I'm sure that some people will believe it. There's a lot of good conspiracy theories about Titanic, and that is one of them that goes around.
Okay.
But not much proof to it. It's just theory. You can't prove it right, but you can't prove it wrong because there's no evidence to prove it right.
And then, excuse me. In your line of work, you deal with the facts, with the evidence, with the hard hitting, things that really went on. Was this a mechanical error? I mean, is this because it was built to never sink and everything? Go into some of that.
What you're saying is very true. Titanic was built with the most up-to-date specifications. Some of the facts are, and I'm going to hold up my little visual aid here. A teacher that I spoke in her classroom one time had this built for me, and I think it's a little 3D print of the ship, and I thought that is so nice of her. Titanic had these little watertight compartments all the way the length of the ship. Now, if you're in the Navy now, they call them bulkheads, and they run all the way through the ship, all the way sealing off different sections. If you have ever visited a Navy vessel or a submarine, you have to hunker down and step through that tight doorway. They can close that doorway, circle it up, and seal that part of the ship off. Well, Titanic was made, the design was really a brilliant design. If the ship was hit, boom, straight on like this, it would fill the compartment in which it was hit, but it wouldn't flow over those little walls. I got a tickle tonight. They went up above the bulkhead. If it hits directly on the wall, it filled up 2 compartments.
Okay.
It still would stay afloat. The engineering of this ship was that 4 of the first 5 could even fill. And I'm going to try to put it near the bottom of my screen. It would be low in the water, but it still would not flow over into the 5th compartment. So the people would be fine. They would be saved. The ship would be taken. They would put it in a dry dock, lift it up, fix those compartments. But when Titanic hits the iceberg, now I'm going to try to do this visually. It's coming toward the iceberg and it just barely glazes it and bounces off. Boom. Doesn't rip a hole down the side like was predicted. All it does is scrapes the top off of rivets so that water sprays in very fine, very, just a little solid spray. If the hole was in one place, it would be about the size of your refrigerator door. It was not that big. Your refrigerator doors, they've had worse than that. The key to it, though, was it was in the first 5 compartments, and the ship was designed to float if 4 of them were hit. So the pumps could not overtake the water. And what happened was, as the ship begins to sink below the waterline because of the 5 openings, it sank lower than it's supposed to. So the water spills over into the next one. As that fills up, it spills over into the next one, and it cascades through this way. So forensically, it was an incredible, you wouldn't expect it to take 5 compartments out. It did. They were going more southerly than they normally do. So you don't expect icebergs to have been that low in April. And it just so happened that there was at least one pack that they came upon that had this big iceberg on it. When you hold a ship's wheel, you've got spokes sticking out like this. If they would have done this one time on that trip, they would have missed it by miles.
Wow.
Okay. This was one of those, it happened. Nobody did anything that was improper. Nobody did anything. Could they have done things differently? Of course, but nobody knew to do anything differently. By the time they realized there was an iceberg in front of them, they tried to avoid it.
Was it dark and like foggy? Was it weather conditions? Is it? And then
it was clear as a bell, and that's what the problem was. Because it was clear as a bell, you take this iceberg, and the water splashes up on it. And what you can see is the white water, the white caps of the splashing. And that's what makes it so easy to see. But when the sea was calm, it wasn't splashing. It would be like on a lake, for example, on a non-windy night. And you have to be very careful. And, you know, something that's almost 3 football fields long, there it is. We're talking almost 900 feet long, won't turn on a dime. And they immediately ordered to turn left to try to go around the iceberg. They wanted to go around it. But this ship was slow to respond because it's so huge. You know, you can't just turn on a dime in that thing. And it was starting to turn as it got close, and it just lightly scraped. It was
so like
fluke is a good word for it, I guess. It was just an incredible amount of bad luck.
With the design of the ship, like the engineers, they made it to where it's supposed to, you know, withstand, you know, this flood of waters, these different compartments, and then but some little old, you know, rivets across the top, just kind of, you know, what was there?
Scrape the top off is all it did. Just scrape the top off.
Was this like a something, you know, like, you know, when they're building things and they're putting cars through crash tests and they're going over every possible scenario? Like, for the time, was it just kind of back then nobody, you know, was thinking crazily outside the box, like, hey, what if, you know, one of these rivets get loose? Can it water fill up another way? You know?
Well, if it would be in one compartment. They could seal that up, but 5 was difficult. Right behind me, you'll see a picture of the side of Titanic that we recovered in 1998. All those little dots are rivets. So the ship had tens of thousands of those rivets all over the ship. And the iceberg just scraped a few of them. And that's what happened. It was totally a fluke. There was always a claim that the steel had problems with it, that it wasn't good, that it had weaknesses and flaws in the steel, a poor quality steel, in other words. And but the response to that is this had the best steel at the time. All the other ships had the same steel and the same quality of it. Olympic came out before and sailed until 1939. It wasn't the rivets. It wasn't the quality of the steel. So that sort of died out. I guess it'll come back one of these days. But they took some of these pieces and they did cuts, and they took and looked at it under a microscope, and you could see some impurities in the steel. But every ship made had those same impurities at that time. So is it as good as the steel they use today? No, because there's better refining processes today. But that was the best they had in those days.
Has the whole Titanic been found, or is there still pieces down there at all? Maybe the whole thing was.
when it started to sink, just as shown in the movie, the front end got very heavy and went underwater, and the back end did come out. There is an entire volume of people that will argue, what angle did this ship go up? Did it go up 30 degrees? Did it go up 70 degrees? What was the angle of this ship? And it's amazing how they will argue their point. And that part doesn't intrigue me as much. We know that it did come up, but it broke. It broke between the third and the fourth funnels. In this area were dining facilities and kitchens and things like that. The bow went down and hits the bottom. The stern spiraled as it went down and landed about a quarter of a mile away. And between the two is this intense debris field of broken iron, where pieces have broken and splintered. They've also recovered the majority of their artifacts from the debris field area because they sprinkled out as the ships went down. And they found everything, a lot of plates, a lot of cooking ware and things of that nature. But there was a lot of personal things like luggage, carry bags, things of that nature. So that was where the majority of it came from. But it's a quarter of a mile apart. I've got a picture from when we were out there in 1998 where you can see one ship on the bow, and then in the distance you can see another ship, and they're diving on the stern at the same time. And you get to see a representation on the top of the ocean, how far they are apart on the bottom.
Wow. Now, I'm going to sound foolish, but of course I watched the movie, but I haven't seen it in so long, and I was a young kid. But to what I remember, and just in the general sense, like if your last few hours on this earth are, because there was only a certain number of lifeboats, and only a certain number of a lot of people were saved, a lot weren't. Is that correct? Like
there were 2,208 on board, and 712 were saved, about a third.
Okay.
1496 did not survive that night.
Was there a scene in the movie, I could be mistaken, but where there was like a woman and a child that were trying to get on the lifeboat, but there was a man that, like, I don't know, pushed him out of the way, or he jumped on the lifeboat instead to save himself? I could be mistaken, but was there any reference of that, or do you know of any knowledge of like those people's last few hours? Was there, raping and pillaging? Was it a lot of praying? And, is there any...
Things came out at one time. CBS knew that Cameron was working on his movie, so they made a miniseries on television, and it came out a few months before Cameron's movie did. I remember that George C. Scott played Captain Smith, and Catherine Zeta-Jones, I think, was in it, and Peter Gallagher. But the other person that was in it, I like Tim Curry. I like everything he acts in, but I didn't like his role in the CBS miniseries of Titanic. He was a bad guy. And so I think it may show something like that in the miniseries. James Cameron had an incredible movie. Now, I do call it Jack and Rose on the Love Boat sometimes, because the Jack and the Rose and the Cal Hockley and the big diamond, or the big, Le Coeur de la Mer, the big stone, was Hollywood. That was his fictitious story surrounded by an incredible truth about Titanic. He went to great detail to make the background as accurate as he could. I was so impressed looking in those rooms, and I really thought that's what Titanic would look like had I been alive in 1912. I was just so impressed with the detail and things like that. One thing he did that you would appreciate. Now, the real Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:37 p.m. It sank and went beneath the waves. The stern went down at 2:20 a.m. So that was 2 hours and 43 minutes. Like you said a minute ago, people began to realize that they are going to die. They're not going to survive this accident. In Cameron's movie, if you have a stopwatch and you start it when the theater ship, when his movie ship hits the iceberg, and then you stop it when the back end finally goes under, it's 2 hours and 43 minutes. He made that time realistic. And just the time you're sitting there with popcorn and your drink, that was the amount of time those people had to deal with this situation. Many people have tried to write, what would you do if you were facing this situation and you were a male and you were not, some of the first class males did make it in, very few second class did, and the only third class did were very lucky. So you and I would be, wow, what are we going to do? We have very few options. And if you and I had been married at that time, our first responsibility and our first thing that we had to do was to get our spouse on board. That would have been our first function. We do everything we could to save our wives, and then we figure out what are we going to do for us at that time. So many incredible decisions and so many crucial points happened in 2 hours and 43 minutes.
Yeah. That's not, when you say it like that, like the first, second, third class, you're back then it was like a racial as well as financial class, economic class. There were probably like the maybe immigrant workers, stewards and stuff like that would still be, some of the workers didn't get saved. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the third class was the poorest of the poor who were coming over to America mostly to start their lives new. In Ireland, for example, there were a lot of Irish immigrants that were coming to America. One of my research areas is with this group from County Mayo, which is Western Ireland. I've been over there, stayed for a few days, met some of the family members of these people. But they had 14 of their village. Now, this village only had 92 people in it. So 14 of those set sail on Titanic to come to America, and 11 did not survive. It only cost £7 in those days to get on the ship. But that area of Ireland was, we're talking dirt poor. Dirt poor meaning whatever came out of the dirt is what caused them to live. If they had animals and if they had some farming, they were going to survive, but they didn't have enough to sell to anyone because the other people didn't have money to buy it. They were doing the same things. And so £7 is about $10 in today's money. It took them 2 to 3 years to save up that much money for those kids, those people to get on that ship. And that's the steerage. That's third class. A lot of steerage passengers were on board. The upper class, the first class, we're talking the mega rich. The people that would have been on first class today would have been the Michael Jordans, LeBron James. Aaron Rodgers is promised 53 or 54 million if he plays next year. He would be first class. Sam Walton, the Walton family that owns Walmart's, would have been in first class. Second class would have been doctors and lawyers and people that own smaller department stores, CEOs, people like that. And so there was a big distinction between that first class mega rich, second class, and then the very, very poor socioeconomic. I would have been third class. I could not have afforded anything like that. Second class would have been only if I had been working for a while and had saved up and, taking my first cruise and wanting to enjoy it.
Do they have a breakdown of like the actual races? Like were there blacks, whites, Latinos? Do you have an actual breakdown of that?
There were 23 different countries on board.
Okay.
And those, if you break down each of those, The only pure African American family was from Haiti. It was Joseph LaRoche. Now he had married a French who was Caucasian, and so his his children were half and half. You know what I'm talking about? Half
Yeah.
Caucasian, half African American.
Breeds, yeah.
And I don't know what the correct term for that is. My apologies.
I call myself a mixed breed. I'm a mixed breed. Some people biracial, whatever. Yeah.
Biracial. That's, I think, the correct term. When I look at somebody, I deal with you because of how you talk and how you treat people. That's what I think is important in life. So I don't worry about a lot of those type things. But Louise LaRoche was the sweetest lady. She was such a pretty lady as she grew up, and she was one of the last ones to pass away. But I think he was the only true African American on board. There were Spanish, there were Serbian, there were Turks, English, Scottish, Ireland, Norwegian, Sweden, and Finland. It's a long night. So all these countries, there was even someone from South America that had been on it. There was, of course, American, Canada. That's where they were coming to. But 23 different countries. There were China and Japan were even represented. And that's what caused some of the problems is you've got this multi-group, this huge group, a microcosm with so many different components. And people see a sign on the wall and they have no idea what it's written in because they don't speak English. So the first thing is they have to find out where their cabin is. So they try to find a sign that matches what it says on their ticket. And people have to show them how to get there. But when the tragedy started, they didn't know what to do. And when people would say, okay, here's what you need to do, get your life belt on, get up, get ready to go up. We're going to go into the main meeting room. They're going, what? In their own language. So there was a horrible confusion in those situations. It really was sad. After Titanic's accident, there was an American inquiry. William Alden Smith out of Michigan, excuse me, held an American inquiry. And Senator Smith, he was from Michigan, senator from Michigan, would ask these different questions, and they came up with a bunch of conclusions on what caused the problem. And one of which led to laws being passed. Any boat that lands or ship that lands on American soil, in other words, you dock at an American port, had to have enough lifeboats for every passenger and crewman on board. If you go on a cruise right now and that ship holds 2,500 people, they're going to have lifeboats for 4,000. They just have more than they need to. Another thing is led to, again, if you've gone on a cruise, the first thing you do before you set sail is you go to a muster drill. It tells you your muster station is station D. And so you'll report to station D. They will check your name off and they'll say, when you come out here, if there is an emergency and you hear, please report to your muster stations, you will tell your name. Now they've got little tablets. They can click off your name very quickly to check you in. Used to, they'd put them on clipboards and things like that and have a clipboard there and they'd check off everybody as they got into a lifeboat. They lower a lifeboat. You ever go into a hallway and put a school book over your head when you're in elementary school? Tornado drills?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
fire drills, things like that, all came from this same idea that we need to know what to do in the event of an emergency in situations where there's lots of people. And so some good did come from the tragedy in that sense. Mm-hmm. But as they began to load the lifeboats, the first and second class people were coming up on deck. The first class thought, I don't want to get in that little boat. That's not what I'm here for. I want to go back down and have a cup of tea. And so finally they let the women know, we need you to get in, ma'am. Please come this way. Women, we need women. They were afraid. They wanted to get the boats away early because they knew if they were later, there would be panic and lots of ugly things could happen. a lot of people swarming the lifeboats and things of that nature. So it was unimaginable is the term you're talking about. Did they plan on some of this kind of stuff happening? They never thought a lot of these things could happen.
Yeah, it's just to think of your last few moments and the the terror that must have been, going on. Uh, Even the movie, great movie, doesn't even do justice. It's like, to give you a quick history for myself, I've never been on a cruise, but I did. I used to be a fisherman in Alaska, and I was on the processor boats. I've been on a smallest one, I think it was like 18, 24 footer. It was about 12 men. And then I was on like maybe 80 footer, the Sea Freeze Alaska out of Dutch Harbor. And that myself, I'm scared of water. I go into my knees in maybe a lake. I don't do oceans and I don't do diving boards, love showers, a jacuzzi, whatever. But we did the mustard drills and everything, put our survival suit on. They just told us, this is the Bering Sea. You, I think with your survival suit, you could last like 12 hours, but even in the middle of June, you got maybe 30 seconds in that frigid water before you seize up and you're gone. So I always looked at it like, I'm out here to make the dollar. And if anything did go bad, then, there's nothing I could do. So I made peace on the flight, there every time. But can you talk about some of the engineering on like just a basic modern, ship? There was a Captain Phil Harris, who was on the Deadliest Catch. There was a boat that sank a decade or so ago. RIP to that crew. So, but what is the safety factor? Maybe against versus some of your fishing vessels, and then your cruise ships. Are they all built to the same, I guess certifications? But is one deadlier than the other in a sense?
Ooh, big question there. Looking at 1912, now something was happening in 1912 that they didn't have 20 years before that. They had Marconi. Deet, 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 and they could send a signal electronically. Other ships could hear them and could come to their aid. If you look at the coast off of the Carolinas, there's 1,000 ships that have been lost over time that they have documented. They call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. The Grand Banks, which runs from about New York and Boston, that area, all the way parallel to the coast of Canada. It's not very deep. It's about 300, maybe 400 yards in some places. But then once it gets to the edge of the Grand Banks, it drops straight down, and Titanic was into the deep down areas. But they find ships occasionally that are on that ledge, and there's hundreds missing. There are all sorts of books. Nigel Pickford did an atlas of shipwrecks, and it's got over 1,000 shipwrecks in it. And you look at that Grand Banks area, and there's dots where these ships approximately disappeared. Off the coast of North Carolina, small ships, larger, even, we only hear about the major ships like the Andrea Doria, the Lusitania, which was struck by a torpedo, Titanic struck by an iceberg. But they had numerous ships with people on board before then. They don't know what happened to them. They just left port and never were seen again.
Is this,
Those
are you
ships still are
talking
down.
pre and post Titanic? Like even in this modern era, we still lose ships, recently.
We lose some these days, much less than before because of the technology. Ships now have radar, so they can see something coming towards them in plenty of time to avoid it. There are still, to say that nobody sinks these days is an impossible statement to make. There will still be ships sinking. But the good news is they can save the people in them now. And usually it's some kind of an unusual disaster and the ship goes down with very few people at loss. The most recent one that I know of is the Costa Concordia, I think. And that was the one where the captain was going a little bit too far over and a rock ripped the side of his ship and the ship turned over and sank, and it was halfway underwater. They were in very shallow water. So the ship didn't completely go underwater. And I think there was still several people that died in it, even though most got off safely. And that was due to an error by the captain. So it does happen. It's very rare. Anything that floats can sink if the right method of events happen to it. But the frequency of it now is tremendously less than it was in those years.
Yeah. I remember on my journey, my first time sitting in the galley and I was taking a nap and like I woke up to like, ship shaking and I look out the galley window and it's pure black. And 2 seconds goes by and we're up on the swell and it's pure blue for miles. And then we're down again. And I was like, oh, I freaked out. And I went out a little bit on not even on the deck, but opened up the little door just to look up at the swell. And I'm like, the deckhands are out there. And I see a guy, he's standing there. I mean, it's like, 20, 30 foot water on the side of the boat. And then we go back up. And I was just right there at that moment. I was just even mind blown and like the architecture, the engineering, how is all this possible? It just blew me away. Do you have an opinion on that flight 370, that Malaysian airplane that went missing like 10 years ago? Like, how does something like that happen? And to my knowledge, it still hasn't been found. Like, how do we lose a plane, but
it went down below radar and they don't know what happened to it after that?
Yeah.
They had a general area that they thought it may be, but you're talking, tens of thousands of square miles. It will take years to cover and sweep some of those areas. It took them it was 70 years to find Titanic. So I think they'll eventually find remains of that flight. I know that the families need some closure. But when it went down under radar, there was no idea it could have even turned as it was going under radar and not even be in that grid that they think it may have landed in. Yeah. And of course, they use just good common sense. If the flight pattern is going in this path here, they estimate it to be here, because that's the predicted path. If it varies just a little bit, it still will be within a certain window there. And so every time I hear of something like that, it just, I just close my eyes and hope that they were able to find some survivors. But after a while, they didn't. You're talking about getting in your suits, your neoprene suits. When we went out there in 1998, we were on board the Ocean Voyager. It was a little bit bigger than your ship, but we all had to pass we called them Gumby suits, even though they were bright orange. We had to get in them within 2 minutes. We had to go from standing up with our Gumby suit to being fully in, zipped up, hat on, 2 minutes. If we couldn't pass the 2-minute test, we weren't supposed to be on board.
Yeah, that's what they did with us too.
And so you've got to be able to get into them quickly. And like you said, it keeps your body temperature tight. You have a whistle, you have a light so they can locate you quickly. But even if the water's as cold as you had it up in the Bering Strait, oh my goodness, that's the Bering Sea is horrifically cold. And it'll only work for so long. When we were at the end of the 98 expedition, Hurricane Bonnie struck North Carolina and turned eastward to go out into the ocean. And we were very happy. It was about 400 miles south of us. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, it turned and was heading straight at us. So we got up early the next morning and they were battening the hatches. They were tying ropes around things. They were securing things in the galley, all areas. They were locking in cupboards. They were doing everything like that, closing them up. And we were told, do not go outside. If you fall over, we'll never find you because we're going to be in a hurricane. And a lot of the people on that ship were landlubbers. They didn't like 8 and 12-foot swells. And then as we hit the storm, we started going up and coming down, and we rode 80-foot swells for 17 hours.
Yeah.
And it was awful. And there was a funny story out of that, though, is right across from my cabin was the big restroom, and it had 4 seats and 4 shower heads. Now, if the women needed to go, one would stay outside while a lady went in, and then they'd change places. That's the way we did it. Guys did the guy thing, we just went in. But the women needed their privacy, so somebody stayed at the door. So guys, if they went in anytime during this hurricane, they would come out and their pants were wet. And the reason why is if you're a guy, you can't hold the walls with 2 hands and do what you need to do. You get my meaning. The fire hose is going crazy. And so all these guys were coming out with wet pants. And finally, I said, guys, if you sit down, you don't have that problem. And they're going, oh, wow, we never thought of that.
Yeah.
So they had to learn how to exist with a huge, huge swell system that we were in.
Yeah.
But I was very relieved when we started getting out of those swells.
Man, I didn't get seasickness until about, we call them trips, like my 3rd or 4th trip out. But this storm was just insane. And, I remember trying to like take a shower in that little, thing, and I'm bouncing around. And then we had the cold steel. This thing like, hitting the cold steel, and it was just miserable. God, it just, it was a great time. Great camaraderie out there. But I thought I was, so 80, yeah, I was gonna say like 50-foot swell. I said like 20 or 30, but it might have been like, just insane. Like buildings on the side of you, and then boom, back up, and oh my God, it was just it was terrible.
Riding a roller coaster. It really was. Going down the side.
Yeah.
You would pick up speed as you went down, and as soon as you hit the bottom, boom, you're coming back up. The back of the ship, the deck back there, would always go under water as we started going back up, and it would flood the back end of the ship. It was the work deck back there.
Yeah.
That was a lot of things came loose, and they had to run out there and try to tie them down. One guy was out there, he was secured, and they had ropes around him for him to get out there and try to tie down one of the ROVs. But he was out there lashing, and he's trying to keep his balance, and then he's got to hold his breath because here he's about to go underwater, and then when he clears the water, he catches his breath and he works some more. And there's no way to say, okay, time out. We want to restart on this. You can't do it.
Yeah.
So good crew though. Good crew handled it well.
Yeah, the fishing crews, man, they some of the best people, man. And you have to be in sync, because your life's literally on the line. I do want to bring up the Titanic Con and stuff, before we get you out here, but I want to ask you like about your high school teaching career. Is that something that you did for a long period of time? Was that a career for you at one point? And when did you get into that?
My college career was at Clemson University. My freshman year, I played football. I had to stop due to ankle surgery. I learned a lot about myself playing on a team that went on 2 years later to win a national championship. I was very proud happy for a lot of my friends on that team. They were awesome teammates. I got a degree in physics, not teaching. I got a degree actually in physics, and then got teacher certification and began to teach. The day that I first was hired to teach, I had 4 interviews, was the day that the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up in January of 1986. And I got 2 job offers, one for the remainder of that school year and one starting in August at a school in South Carolina near Clemson University by chance. I ended up retiring from South Carolina in 2011 and then started teaching at the college level. I do have a master's degree in physics, so I'm able to teach at the college level. And I teach at Asheville Buncombe Technical College in Asheville. And I have a lot of wonderful students that come through, and it's my job to get them to understand all of these wonderful physics equations and principles and concepts. And got some really gifted students. I've been very blessed in my career. So I'm been teaching, and let's see, in 2 more years, I get to retire in North Carolina if I so choose. Dirt and I are on a contest to see who's going to outlive the other one. You know, I'm older than Dirt is what some of my students used to tell me. But I've been very blessed in life. God has provided open doorways that I've chosen to step through. And I've been very blessed with, I've got to meet some of the world's greatest underwater explorers. I got to work with the one ship that everybody knows the name of if you've been through 3rd and 4th grade. I was a part of the 1996 expedition to recover Titanic artifacts in 1996. I was there as an observer and then made some proposals. And then in 1998, I was a full-fledged member of the expedition. And I built an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. In other words, a robotic camera system. It was tethered, so we controlled it with a joystick. And we had a 3-year plan. The first year we were going to go down, make sure it works, do some simple tests. We were hoping to go inside of it in the year 2000, inside the ship, and look at some of the incredible things that are still inside the bow and inside the stern, what's left of it. And then in 2002, we were going to add a manipulator. Manipulator is like a claw. And we were going to design and we were going to work on a system to where we could either tag or use a mechanism to attach to something and help bring it to where it could be recovered. Our system was small, so it wouldn't have a lot of power to lift heavy objects, but we could tag them, move them into a basket of some sort, and then the basket be lifted up. So those are some things that we had planned. But the big thing we did in 1998, as you'll see behind me, is we recovered this large piece of the hull. It weighed 17 tons. It's called the Big Piece. And you mentioned the Titanic Con.
So
we're having it.
But sorry, that's a real, that's not a green screen. That's a real.
Well, that's a virtual background for my Zoom. That is a photograph of the actual, that is at the Luxor in Las Vegas.
Oh, really? Okay.
It is. They have a Titanic artifact exhibition that's on the atrium level, right above the casino level. It's beside this new King Tut exhibit. And there's also a couple of other things. The Blue Man Group is on the atrium level. They got a great restaurant called Diablo's. Outstanding food, A+ quality and reasonable. Anyway, that they did not pay me for that endorsement. But this piece was recovered, and it was about 5 years worth of work, and a great team got together to bring it up. August 10th is the 25th anniversary of the recovery of the Big Piece. So we're going to do Titanic Con 2023, the Titanic Conference, in Las Vegas, the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th of August. The first day, we're going to try to have some Titanic family members there, meaning somebody who had relatives on board the ship. Now, I myself, in 2018, did a lot of genealogy, and I found out that a passenger named Constance Willard, same as mine, that her family was from Horsmonden, Kent, in England. my family, the Willard line, is from Horsmond in Kent. And so I started looking at the two side by side, and I found a common ancestor. So we are distant cousins, 7 or 8 generations back. So I'm not a close relative, but I'm still a cousin. Her line lived in the Ohio region and Minnesota region, and they made a lot of money off of railroads and some other ventures. And my branch of the family left a little earlier and wanted land, so they came down south. And the Civil War erupted. Poor dirt farmers couldn't pay the high taxes that were brought into it, so they lost a lot of their land. That's what my family did, because we were all poor dirt farmers by the time the Civil War was over. Most of my family became mill workers because it was that tough. Whereas the Civil War and everybody moving westerly just added to the railroad industry, and the railroad just grew and grew. But that's what her family did. But the first day of the conference, we hope to have some Titanic family members. We're going to have Frank Goldsmith Jr., whose father was Frankie Goldsmith. Frankie was a 9-year-old survivor with his Frank Jr.'s grandmother, Emily Goldsmith. Emily and Frankie were both survivors. He lost his grandfather. He never knew his grandfather because grandfather died on Titanic. So Frank has an incredible story. We've invited several others. We hope to have 4 or 5. And then we're going to have the 1996 team, where they tried to raise this and some complications came in. In the 96 team, we will tell a little bit about what they tried, and then let people talk to them and meet them and ask questions. The second day will be the 98 team. We're going to do a presentation about the raising of the big piece, other things that we accomplished while we were there. I just talked with, for all you Canadian listeners, if any of you are out in Canada, Bob McEwen messaged me just a day or so ago, and we are hoping Bob will be able to be there. Bob was on board with us in 98 when he worked with 2020. I think ABC is 2020 or NBC. Anyway, he was with 2020, and it was NBC back then, I think. And Bob is a great, great storyteller. I love Bob to death. He's just an awesome man. Became friends with him on the ship. We've got Charles Haas that we've invited, who is a historian on both, and he can tell many stories as well. We've got some great photographs by Gunter Bobler. Gunter is Swiss. He is has allowed us to use some of his photos. There's a book out about it. It's called Our Story, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the 1998 Titanic expedition. And I wrote that book asking people to send me their memories, and I put their words in the book. So I will segue from incident to what we were doing, and I'll let them tell how they felt about certain things and what they saw and what they remembered. And it made for an outstanding read. We've had high reviews from everybody. They really feel that they were at the expedition the way we went through each chapter, each part of it. But that came out 4 years ago, and had a lot of great results from it. And then we're going to celebrate the 25th anniversary on the 10th. And then the third day, this is what's going to be unique for your listeners. We have invited several cast members from James Cameron's movie. The third day is going to be a movie day where we talk about their experiences while filming. We have engaged 2 with discussions already. Both want to be there. All we have to do is cross the T's and dot the I's. And you know what you got to do. You just got to make the final agreements. If they're interested in coming, we're going to do everything we can to make it happen. We've got 4 more that we've lined up to talk with this coming week. And as soon as we get commitments, we're going to advertise those on the website. Registration opens March 1st. We're only going to have 250 people. The room that we've reserved it will easily hold 250. And so we're going to limit it 250 so that everybody gets time with each guest that's there, each of the celebrities. You know, if we did one of these mega signature cons where there's 2,000 or 3,000 people, you have to wait in a long line. All you do is get a quick autograph. Hello, thank you very much. Next, you know, it's like that kind of thing. And we wanted it to be more personal, more where, oh, you have time to sit and talk with somebody maybe because there's a few minutes there. So we're doing that. And the website, if anybody is interested, is at voyagesexplorertitanic.com. One word, voyagesexplorertitanic.com. And you'll see that there's a tab that says Titanic Con 2023. There's also our story, which talks about the book. It talks about another project that I've created called Project Name Them All, which is about those bodies that they recovered from the ocean and took to Halifax and Nova Scotia. And they don't know their names. There's 42 of them that are unknown. And we have created a project. It's an international cast where if the cemeteries will allow us, we will take DNA. We won't exhume the bodies. We'll go down and get the DNA. And we'll take 2 samples. We're going to send one to Copenhagen, to the university there, where one of our DNA specialists is where he works. And then another to a medical DNA specialty lab in the South. And both of those then should corroborate DNA tests so that we don't have confusion. One will even give us lineage and background information. For example, possibly Serbian. Well, are they from Serbia or Turkey or maybe Italian or Spanish? Or, you know, there's a lot of different countries in that area where the skin tone may be similar. And so the Copenhagen test, ADNA is what it's called, will give us, this is the area in which this DNA sequence comes from. It has a lot of these characteristics in it. So by knowing a better location where one is from, we can test a smaller group of descendants. And we think we can name every one of those from which we get a good DNA sample, a viable DNA sample. But this Voyages Explorer Titanic site talks about the conference, how to register for it. And we are going to have an incredible week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in Las Vegas. Come out a day early, enjoy the city for a day or so.
Yeah.
Fly out on Saturday, and then you can rest up Sunday before you have to go work on Monday.
I might see you there. So I'm born in Las Vegas and you know, raised in Nevada, and I'm moving in the process of moving back to Reno. So I might buy my ticket and then you know, come down and see it. Question: if I do, can I you know, maybe film, you know, do a live on site interview with you, and you know, maybe get some footage?
For you, we'll work out something for sure.
Get like a little media.
We'll definitely work out something. Maybe we can even get a couple of expedition people that you might want to talk to as well once you hear some of them and hear what they have to say. And there's several of them that are good presenters, and you would like talking to those.
Okay, yeah, that'd be interesting. You know, I'm trying to turn this into a media company, not just a podcast. I'd like to, you know, get some. I was trying to get my backstage media pass all-star weekend. You know, they were like, "Who Harris is drinking?" And get the hell out of here.
The other thing is you can use it as a job expense for your taxes. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great. So this big piece here, is this the largest piece that was discovered, or like, and then I guess 2-part question, but is the Titanic scattered around the world in different museums, or is there, you know,
this is the biggest piece that's been brought up. There are larger pieces down there that have broken off, but when they were contemplating recovery of some signature piece, something unique that could tell a story, it had to be big enough to fit into museums. You know, you could get too big of a piece. What are you going to do with it? Sit in the parking lot, and it wouldn't do any good then. So they had to have a certain size. But this piece weighed 17 tons. It was not a little section. it may look little when you stand in front of it, but you consider 3 football fields long, 60 feet tall.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is off the starboard side. That's the port. So it's off the starboard side, about right in this area right here. So it was one of those pieces that fractured when the ship broke. There's been a lot of controversy about recovery. There's one group, really particularly in America, that was anti-recovery. They wanted the ship to be left alone. It's a graveyard. Those of us who did things like this and recovered the artifacts, we're ghouls, we're grave robbers. They were very vitriolic toward us. They were very hateful. And, you know, I could understand they have their opinion, but it is their opinion. It is not how everybody feels. George Tulloch is the person who ran the company, and when the legal status to recover the artifacts were granted. Now, understand how it works. If you find something in international waters, if you go out there and you find something, you need to bring up 2 things. First of all, is a piece, and second of all, proof of the name of this ship that you find. Say you find the John Hancock, just to throw out a name there. So what you do is you take maybe that plate in, and you bring the video footage where you go and you show the name along the side of the bow, or you bring up the bell and the bell's got the name on it, and you present to an admiralty court. Now, admiralty courts it's different from a U.S. federal court. An admiralty court, there's several of them. Any country that has Atlantic coastline has an admiralty court in it. And what they did is they came up with this admiralty court idea in the 1700s because you had a British naval power, you had the French and the Spanish that were huge. You had America just getting started with their Navy, and all of the rules of warfare on the North Atlantic, in the Atlantic, they needed everybody to agree on those. One such rule is, if you find a ship and it's a warship from Spain, Spain maintains 100% rights to that ship. You can recover from it, but it all belongs to Spain because it's a warship. That is very crucial because back in the days with all the Spanish galleons, piracy was huge in the Caribbean. So they did not send treasure on regular old cargo ships. They all sent them on the military ships. A group called Odyssey found a ship that they nicknamed the Black Swan, and it was about $175 million worth of silver, gold, and some other things. And Spain filed a claim in an admiralty court because that ship that it was on was actually a ship of war. And the admiralty court ruled that it belonged to Spain. Now, Spain had to give the company a finder's fee and a recovery fee. I don't know what the exact percentage was. It may have been 20% or 30%. 30% of $170 million is not bad. Okay. That's not a bad chunk, but it belonged to them. So this admiralty court has jurisdiction over the wrecks. So George Tulloch worked with the court, and they said that our recovery status depended on 3 things. That RMS Titanic Inc., that's the company, had to, number 1, anything that they brought up, they had to conserve it and preserve it so that it wouldn't just fall apart. They had to take care of what they recovered. That was a no-brainer, absolutely. Number 2, and this was one of George Tulloch's big things that he pushed for. If you bought a Titanic artifact, guess where it would end up? It would end up on your mantle or over on a table that you've got, or it would be in the middle of a table in your house. And who would see that? Only the people that you invited to your house. I have a mantle right there, and that's where my pieces would go if I had something like that. Might be in a showcase right beside it or near it, but it would be over there, and nobody would get to see those unless I invited them into my house. So the judge said, we're not going to sell artifacts. The company totally agreed with that. They would be kept as a collection. Now, they could sell the collection, but the court had to approve who it was. The next group had to agree to all these agreements. It would be a qualified transfer. It would not be just who wants to buy these. Okay, we'll sell them to you. The third caveat that I thought was wonderful is that the artifacts need to be put on display, and they need to be put on display so that future people, future generations could go and see them and learn the Titanic story. And so I support those. I support all three of those. And that's why there are no auctions for Titanic artifacts. It's because they're all under this guise of this one company, under the leadership and guidance of this other company.
Wow. So how much of the Titanic is still like under there, and will it ever be, it will just be there till the end of time at this point because of there's too much red tape also involved?
Well, the amount they've recovered about 6,000 pieces. Okay. There's not an exact count because if you have a watch and a band, is that one piece or two pieces? If you got a handbag and the handle falls off, is that one handbag and one handle, or is that one bag? So a lot of those type situations came up as the artifacts were recovered. It's about 6,000 pieces. The best thing to say is that that's not even 1% of what's down there. This was only things in that debris field. So if you were to go in the front half of this ship, where all these cabins are, there's luggage, there's trunks. We have a speaker at one of our conference named Julie Williams, who had a great uncle on board, Albert and Sylvia Caldwell. And Albert told the family, he said he walked out of his stateroom and left $100 in gold coins in his dresser. $100 in 1912 gold is worth, she says it's worth about $30,000 today. And so that's laying in that stateroom, and that's either in that dresser or it's broken through the drawer and is laying in the floor, but it's still down there. And gold is going to still be gold for several thousand years. It's going to still look just like it does now.
So
there are leather suitcases, and inside the leather, the chemical tannin that's in the leather. May have heard the phrase growing up, tan your hide. Those of us boys in the South heard it quite often at school and from our parents when we'd misbehave, that we were going to get our hide tanned. And so the tannin that's in the leather helps preserve what's inside those leather cases. They've opened them up, and there's clothing, there's newspapers that you can actually read. There are pieces of history there waiting to be recovered. A lot of them are still down there. And so I asked the question, if to people who tell me it needs to be left alone, that's a grave site. And I'll go, well, are you in favor of all that stuff being destroyed? Because if it's not brought up and preserved, it's going to be destroyed eventually. It can't sit down there forever. It's, some of the pots and pans will eventually corrode to the point of destruction. It'll take a while. All this iron will eventually take a while. Somebody wrote a book called Ghosts of the Grand Banks, that on the 1,000th anniversary of the sinking of Titanic in 2912, it's going to be a big rust spot down there. And so, that's still 800 years away from now, or 900 years away from now.
Is there footage? Obviously, they like the powers that be. Can somebody go down right now, or is there footage to where like they're water diving, scuba diving down, and they have like GoPros or whatever, and is that accessible to anybody right now who just like, you can actually swim down there and take a tour of the ship? And
well, the pressure in your car tire that'll hold your car up off the ground is 42 pounds per square inch. Pressure at Titanic is 6,200 PSI. When I teach my classes, I'll say, take a postage stamp. I used to have some stamps right here and hold this up. But you take a postage stamp and you stick one on the back of your hand. That's approximately a square inch. Put 2 cars on it. That's about three tons. Put another stamp beside it. Put 2 cars on it. Put another postage stamp. Put 2 cars on it. Everywhere you put a stamp, all over your skin, put 2 cars on that stamp, and it will crush severely, way, way up. You know, you can't really free dive more than 300 feet. Some people go a little bit deeper that have had extreme dive training, but Titanic's at 2.5 miles down.
Okay.
Pressure's way too great. Now, what they did do is one group sued to get the right to go down and film. The judge approved that. That was the Haver decision in an appellate court. And the Haver decision opened up tourist dives. People can go down, but they're not supposed to touch the ship. They can go down and look and film and see. And that's what James Cameron did. He shows in his movie there are actual some scenes that he took with his ROV and his camera systems. The one thing that can't happen, though, is there's nobody out there to police the wreck. Now, I'm not accusing any person, so please don't think I'm accusing anything. Bob Ballard saw a statue called the Artemis in the debris field. The Artemis is this beautiful statue. It's about 2 feet tall, possibly. It was on a mantle in the ship. When it broke out, it was laying in the debris area. And before Cameron even went out, the recovery team went out there to try to find that Artemis. It's gone. They can't find it. So somebody went out there, and there was 2 submersibles that went down. Ballard would not have taken it. Ballard would have admitted it had he done so. So it was not Ballard that took the Artemis, but the Artemis has disappeared. So it's pretty well believed who did it, but I'm not, we don't want to say anything without any proof. But it was not Ballard. It was not Cameron. And there's some other things that have been missing. And you just can't police that wreck 2.5 miles down. It's 90 miles away from the nearest civilization.
Yeah. If I was an uber rich guy, whoever, Kim Jong-un or just some tyrant, I mean, I would spend a lot of money trying to deploy some sort of team down there, see what I can get, right? I mean,
absolutely.
In gold, we're talking artifacts.
There is a group called Ocean Gate. They have a submersible named Titan. And Titan has been down to the wreck, and they make tourist dives. And I have personal friends who have been on board Titan, and they have honored the intent of the law not to touch. And they've done an excellent job of following that mandate. But they get some incredible footage. They offer tourist dives. If you wanted to be a mission specialist, you could pay for a spot and go out there and take about a 6-hour drive around Titanic.
And just like you're in a submarine type, and you're just in.
Absolutely.
Wow, I don't know
big
about
submersible. That. It's a little expensive, but maybe it's $250,000 was the last that they were talking about. So again, you're talking the super rich. Sure, I got $250,000 to spend. I think I'll go see Titanic for 6 hours, and they do.
If I wasn't so scared of drowning and halfway claustrophobic, I just don't know if I could go underwater like that. I mean, I'd be so freaked. I even the thought of it. There's 2 things that freak me out: free falling and like submersion. Yeah, those 2 things.
Well, you would have to worry about drowning at that depth. The implosion would be instantaneous. If something happened, and it would be like boom, and it's all gone.
Okay.
It is immediate. So you wouldn't have to worry about that part of it. But now claustrophobia, the French ROV is has a 6-foot sphere. It's
Oh.
6 feet from surface to surface. I'm 6'3", so I can't stand up in it. I've got to bend over, and there's equipment on it, so I've got to bend over even lower. And so they end up with two people laying on their stomachs, looking out these two little front portholes in the front, and then a person sits like this over them in a seat, and he's the one that steers the submersible. That's Nautil. And so you're talking about claustrophobic. That is, the French require a doctor's note stating that you are not claustrophobic. You would get in there and you would get comfortable, and they would turn the lights out. And then when they released everything, you would take 2.5 hours in darkness to drop to the bottom of the ocean.
Oh no.
And you'd be kind of cold. It would get chilly. So you're in sweatshirt and a jacket and things like that.
Oh.
They turned the power on as you got close to the bottom. I know you're starting to shake already. And then you'd be 4 to 6 hours, depending on what your mission was. Yeah. And then they would say, okay, we're ready to return to the surface. So you get good and comfortable. You put your pillow down there, and they would say, here we go. And they would release the ballast, and it would start lifting. And they would say, let's conserve some power. And they'd turn the lights off, and you'd be in total darkness for another 2.5 hours as it goes back up to the surface.
Oh, no way. See, I did one of those. I've done the isolation tank. That whole thing. Like I can go in the MRI machine, but it's the fact, like I can open up the isolation tank and hey, I'm in a room, but underwater like that and just oh god, no, I don't.
It'd be different. And there's other complications too. There have been several women who have dived down to the shipwreck. I'm trying to think. Sarah James was the one on our expedition that went down. And if you've got to go to the bathroom, you're in there for a while. They tell you not to eat any food from a certain time prior to your dive so that the tanks get emptied. Because if you're down there and you got to go to the bathroom, you don't have a whole lot of place to stand up and go. You got to do it right there. And there's no privacy and things like that. And so usually the first thing they do when they get up to the surface is they open up, they stand up, they stretch a little bit, and then they want something to drink, something to eat, and then they go to the restroom. And that's what I do. So it's a unique environment. It really was. I was asked if you were ever invited to go down, would you? I said, absolutely. I would try it one time just to say, I've seen it with my own eyes. Yeah. I've studied it for so many years. People think that a lot of us Titanic researchers are sort of, something's wrong with us sometimes because we know so much about the ship and so much about the people on board. And there's truth to that. I can tell you about some of those passengers, some of the things that they had to deal with after they survived. I can tell you about their families. I can talk about their experience. I know more about them than I know about some members of my own family. Not necessarily close members, but extended family. But that has been such a big part of so many people's lives. It's a different world, it really is.
Yeah.
It's been a special part in mine. And I felt drawn to the ship for some reason. And I guess it was my family member in a way saying, I'm telling my story.
And did you know that you had a descendant on there before you got interested, or were you just naturally interested and then
found out there was a Willard on board and thought it was cool? And I asked my mom and I said, did anybody from the Willard family die on Titanic? And I showed her the book and she said, no, we would have heard about that. That would have been something that we would have known about, until I traced the genealogy back farther than word of mouth. And, several generations back there, it is. And that was pretty special.
Wow.
She is died in 1962, I believe it was, in Riverside, California. She had no children. She had no husband. She never married. And they interred her in a mausoleum in Riverside. 2 years later, her brother, who has a cemetery plot in Minnesota, had her transferred. She was removed from that mausoleum, transferred, and is buried in the family plot in Minnesota, but she doesn't have a marker on her grave. And so one of the things that I did, I started right before COVID changed the world, and then initiated this call a few weeks ago. I called the cemetery and I told them that you have buried in the Willard family plot one Constance Willard, and she is in an unmarked grave. And he said, that is correct. He said, we know where it's at, though, because we have it marked on the official diagram where her remains were buried. It was cremated. It was not like a full, huge coffin. And I said, well, I'm a distant cousin. I told him about the genealogy. And I said, she was a survivor of the RMS Titanic. He says, she was. We don't have that down here. And I said, she was. And I said, I would like to put a marker on her grave, something nice, something appropriate that the cemetery approves, that's got her name, her dates, and a survivor of the RMS Titanic. I said, she needs to at least have her name on her grave. And he said, let us do some research. We got to look at some legal issues. Also in that same cemetery, a little ways over, are two other survivors of Titanic. They were related to the Pillsbury factory. You remember Poppin' Fresh, the Pillsbury Doughboy? That Pillsbury family. So they were survivors, and that is where they were buried after they passed. So they looked up the legal records. The cemetery plot was purchased by Constance's brother and had her brought there. And he died later on, a few years later in the 1960s. So he's buried with his wife. Constance is over to the side a little bit. So legally, that branch of the Willards owns that plot. And he said, we don't know if anybody's even been here to look at these in 20 or 30 years, but I guess it'd be the great grandson, one of the great grandchildren now, I guess, would legally own the plot. And they said, if they come along and say, we don't like that, remove that, we'd have to take it up because they're the owners. He said, but we'd work out, maybe put it somewhere else, pointing to where the grave is, type thing, to honor where she's at. He said, but we talked with our boss, and he talked with the owner of the cemetery, and they said, who's going to object to something like that? It's not costing them anything. It's just paying tribute with a name. It's not gaudy or tacky. I can understand. I wouldn't want it if it was tacky, but to have her name, her dates, survivor, RMS Titanic. And, he said, do you want put on there by you that you put this up? And I said, we can put some kind of a line up there, erected by Titanic Conference family, something like that, Titanic Con. And I thought that what I'd do also is open up an opportunity for people if they wanted to make a contribution, we'd put their name in the donations to help do that. So some things are still happening. Some stories are still going forward. It's very special.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like one of those things, 110, 11 years later.
111 years this year.
There's still things coming out. We went over the red tape. They're still pulling up pieces. One of those things that's going to be around, another 100 years, or you said 1,000 years, and there's going to be rust and a whole bunch of things, man. That's incredible. So like every day when you wake up, you're just is this something like at what age did you embody it though? Like, did you take on, this, it seems like you're just a man with a very driven with a mission, but now you have a purpose, not just for yourself, but for others and other people of the Titanic. Like, when did you take on that sort of?
The mid 90s is when I really accelerated what I was doing. My mom would always get me Christmas presents or birthday presents that had something to do with Titanic, a new book or something like that. She would always, is there something you'd like for Christmas? And I'd say yes, and that's what she'd get me. And it was Titanic based and things like that. So I had quite a few of those type things. And the more I read, I did something that was real geeky. I liked getting 2 copies of every book, because in one of them I could make notes, and in one of them I could keep without my notes in case I just wanted to read it. So I'd highlight and mark and put little, comments, and put little Post-it types and index card types in some of those books. And that started probably mid-90s is when I really kicked it in. And then we had a chance to go out in 96. Wow. And then I was doomed. I was hooked.
Yeah. And how long has this conference been going on? Did you say this?
We had our first one in 1999. Didn't do it again for a long time, but we started this in 2016 was our first one, and we've done it every year in August, except for 2020 for COVID. We had to not do it for COVID purposes. So 21 and 22. 2019, we had 9 Titanic family members present. It was a very special one. And there were 9 family members that were there. So
and
they all told the stories.
Are you trying to get Leonardo at this 2023? Is he going to be one of
He is not on our list, because I don't think we can we have his fee for a daily appearance.
Right.
If he shows up, we will welcome him with open arms. But he and Kate Winslet are just in a different zone now. They're both active in so many different things. She's turned into an incredible actress. He's Leo. He's Leonardo. He's so special and unique in all of his movies as well. But we're looking right now at some of the other actors that are in it. One that fascinates me that I'd love to talk to is Billy Zane. I thought his role as the bad guy, as one of the villains, showed tremendous acting skill on his part, because there were times when I would feel sorry for Caledon Hockley. And you don't usually feel sorry for a bad guy, but he would have a facial expression or the way he would do a line, and you almost had pity for him. And that is a difficult acting or character acting to do, is to have someone feel pity for the bad guy. And I thought, man, that's a great job he did. So he's one I would like to talk with. The other one that's so versatile is the lady who played Rose's mother, Ruth DeWitt Bucator, Frances Fisher. She was in the movie Unforgiven as the madam of the brothel there. And she just lights that movie up. She is so brilliant in that role in Unforgiven. And then to see her as the staunch, first-class lady with that back always straight up and that chin straight out and that head only turning from side to side. She did such a great dramatic change to be in that role. And what I'd love to hear them talk about is things they did in their roles. One of the scenes that you don't see in Cameron's movie, I found out about in 1999. We had an actor named Bernard Fox come from the movie. The reason we got Bernard Fox is that he was also in A Night to Remember in the 1950s. So he was in 2 Titanic movies. A lot of people remember Bernard Fox from Bewitched. He was in Hogan's Heroes. One of his last major movie roles was in The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. He was Winston, the pilot of the airplane that went flying, and the sand image starts chasing them. But Winston was the airplane pilot. And so he was able to tell us about a lot of those type things. So we had him there. I'm trying to think where I was. I digressed when I talked about that. But he told us about so many behind the scenes things. I know what it was. It was the clipped out, deleted scene. He told us that there was a scene of one of the lifeboats unloading on Carpathia, and he was in it. Johan Griffith was in it. Liam Toohey was in it, who plays Chief Joffin, Chief Baker Joffin. And what they are doing is, here they are. They're haggard. They're cold. They've just come off of a lifeboat, and in front of them is a gauntlet of wives looking for their husbands. Have you seen my husband? Where's my husband? Please tell me where my husband is. Did you see anything? And they've got to go through this wall of women, and all of them are looking at the men, and some of them are going, "Why did you survive and my husband didn't?" And Bernard called it the gauntlet. He said we had to run that gauntlet of women, and he said that would eat your heart out. It would really rip it out. And so, with the wonderful YouTube, they have some of those deleted scenes available, and it's under deleted scene Titanic, a Titanic deleted scene Carpathia, I think, and it shows them go through there. And so we got to learn about that from Bernard Fox, who was in that scene. And there's others that are just as powerful. And he made a masterpiece. He really did. A lot of people say, well, it'd been better if Jack and Rose part wasn't there, but nobody would have gone to see it. It was the Jack and the Rose love story that brought the people to the theater. One of my students came into class. This is about April. Titanic had been in the theater since December, so it's 4 or 5 months. And she said, "Coach, how many times have you gone to see Titanic?" And I said, 5, maybe 5 or 6. She said, "We're going again tonight. This will be my 28th time. I just love Jack. I cry every time he dies." This was a high school girl, and she was in love with Jack Dawson, and that's why she kept going back. She said, "I just cry when he dies." I had to sort of chuckle at that, but she remembers that movie well.
Yeah, man, long lasting. Do you ever think that they will make a Titanic remake, like the remake and everything else? Or could it?
Probably, but I don't know if it'll ever do as good as this one did. I
Awesome.
don't know how it could do any better than this one did. They would have to do a different angle on it, I would think.
You like a Netflix series of some sort? You can get like episodes of the progression and the franticness and everything, maybe.
I'm sure they will try. All great events are recreated over and over again. You just have to get a generation that's willing to try it, and getting somebody willing to invest in it, I guess. I would hope that they would hold true to the basic stories and the basic things that went on, as Cameron did, and not create fiction like CBS did. CBS took the name of the ship, it hits an iceberg and sinks, but a lot of the other stuff in it, 90% of it was either incorrectly attributed or misnomered or even total fiction. So I would hope that if they do it, it's truthful.
Yeah. And last question, like, you know, have you been reached out, from like whether it's a History Channel, ABC, NBC, are you one of the guys that when these companies are looking to invest in something like this and they look, hey, we need a guy on board? Because I could just picture you, like on History or Nat Geo, and you're talking about, but in that History Channel, editing way. Have you ever done things like that?
Nat Geo did a special with Bob Ballard for 2012, and they used some of my research, and they credited me in the thank yous at the end. I was very honored to have them do that. Nat Geo tends to have their own group of experts that they rely on over and over again. They've had good success with those people, and they keep going back to them, and I can understand that. The History Channel doesn't do much anymore unless it's aliens or something like that. They've drifted so far from history that it's sad. Discovery is going the same way. They hopefully are going to go try to shift back and do some adventure things again. But I've had Infinity Productions out of Canada. one of the producers up there, the owner of the company and the producer, bought the book. And he bought it and he read it and he called me up and had the company call me up, and he said, Shell is the name of this man's first name, loves the book. He wants to know if you would be willing to work with him on making a documentary about the big piece. I would be one of the executive producers, because I wouldn't have to research. I could tell them what happened when and when we did whatever, and save a lot of research time and a lot of research budget, because I remember. Plus, I know everybody that was on board of both of them, so both expeditions, so I could call them and get footage, photographs, interviews, and things like that without them having to do a lot of chasing down. And I said, absolutely, I'd be honored to have you use my book as the outline of a documentary. The problem is we're in a sensational world where people want shock value. A lot of the networks have said, what is your conspiracy? What is the conflict? And this is not a story with a conflict. This is a story with an incredible success at the end of it, a big triumph. What is the big piece is a presentation I'm going to be doing in Orlando in April. And I'll give you a hint, it's not just a piece of iron. And so it's going to have some other components to it about just what this piece represents to RMS Titanic Inc., the group that recovered it. And so they were going to cover a lot of that aspect as well. And the project is not dead. They just don't have anybody that wants a good documentary anymore. They all want something like a shock value and something like that. They want a reality show effect on an audience. And that's sad. BBC is the one that's the closest to doing real documentaries. But the bad part about booking something with the BBC is they don't show it anywhere but in the UK. The BBC doesn't show their shows here in America. So even though it's a large American team doing an American book from an American author in America, they'd show it in the UK. And that's frustrating that they don't think that there's a lot of confidence in just doing a good documentary anymore. And that's sad.
Yeah. You have to fund your own things, and it sounds like you have a good Titanic family though, and you got some really great things going on, and the people that are a part of it are, all you need, really.
We could do something without a lot of the cost involved, just with the people. The biggest cost that it would undertake would be transportation. If I wanted to interview some of my friends who are on the 98 expedition, one's in Canada, one's in New Jersey, one is on the middle of Canada, several are in the UK, some are in France, one's in Connecticut. The big piece is in Las Vegas. One part of it is in Orlando. So, you'd be hopping on planes and going around and filming quite a bit. And then I would need somebody that would know how to do the sound and know how to do the filming. And then you got to get somebody that's awesome with editing and putting it together. You got to get somebody that's a known face doing the narration, doing the story. We could get the story written, but to get a name in front of it to read it, it's going to cost a chunk. So those would all be budget concerns. But, there are stories to be told, and one day maybe there will be.
Yeah. Well, when I get rich, I'm going to set aside a budget for the vision you just expressed, and I'm going to set aside $250,000 to go down to Titanic. I'm going to get $500,000. We can go together, man.
You got that right. I'll bring the pizza. You bring the soda.
Let's do it, man. I could lay next to you, for a couple hours. I'll probably take a half a Xanax and just, wake up when I get there. But no, hey, thank you so much. This has been I'm not gonna lie, like I feel like retarded on this episode. I'm gonna go back, do more research. I'm gonna rewatch Titanic, and I would love to have you back on in a couple months, maybe after your April event, before the Vegas event to do a recap and give some more promotion. Because as I'm sitting here in the moment too, I'm like, all these other questions are coming up, and because it's such a vast topic to speak about. So I would definitely love to have you back though. And
Would love to do that. I would encourage you to go see this at the theater. You can watch Titanic on your television screen, but it is a much better view when it's on this enormous, huge wall in front of you. It may not be in the theater again in my lifetime, so I had to go. I had to go see it again. And I sat there and I sat through the entire thing. I usually have to go to the bathroom, or I go get some popcorn. I'd take a stretch break in the middle of some of the movies, but not that one. I didn't move. I didn't doze off.
Yeah.
I sat there and watched and absorbed again that incredible work.
Yeah. And now that I have having this conversation with you, it's going to put me in a different perspective, and it gives me a different respect, for the people on board and for, what actually went on, so really great stuff. Did you enjoy your time tonight though on the Harris is Drinking Again pubcast?
Loved it. Thank you so much for inviting me out here. I mean, it was fantastic.
Hey, I definitely appreciate it, man. And then on the back end, of course, I'm going to put all the your links, a lot of the books that you spoke about, Voyages, ExploreTitanic.com. That's all going to be out. This will be out in a couple weeks. I take my time really getting some good editing in, and hopefully I gave a decent interview and / conversation. In parting, is there any plugs you want to give, and just any positivity words of inspiration to the world or to the families? Anything you would like to say?
The thing that I normally end a presentation with when I talk to school groups is, maybe Titanic is not your thing. Yeah, I know about Titanic. I was forced to sit here and listen to this thing today. Find your own happiness. Find your own something to be involved in, and read about it and learn about it, and have it affect your life in a positive way. Learn from it. And there's so many things out there that need their stories told and become a voice. So, whatever you find. Some people love Lord of the Rings, and I know Lord of the Rings people that can tell you the 12th word on the 87th page of the second volume. I know I don't know what that is, for the record, but I know that they love and they are passionate about that. And find your own happiness. Be passionate about many things that are true and just and honest and right.
Excellent, man. That's great ending note. I appreciate you so much. Good luck to the rest of your endeavors. We'll keep in touch on the back end, and definitely look forward to having you on again, though.
We'll do this again. Thank you so much. I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Hey, you have a great night, sir.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Yo, what's going on, guys? If you like this video, click above. We got 2 more right there, or down there, or somewhere. Hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more content. We got amazing interviews like the one you've just seen, or the clip you just seen. I don't know what you watch, because I put this behind the end of every video. So stay tuned. Hit that like, subscribe. Harry's Drinking Again. It goes up. You gotta come with the news. Yeah, that you know. Harris is drinking, and yes, I'm thinking, and I'm plotting and scheming. Yo. You have been listening to the Harris is Drinking Again pubcast. For more, go to YouTube, type in @HideAPubcast. Look us up on Spotify, any and all streaming platforms. Harris is Drinking Again pubcast. Thank you.